Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and I have found a big, beautiful poppy print. And with that poppy print, we do get a beautiful striped fabric. Now, I love big, bold prints, so I have designed a quilt to go with this. It is one block, really large. So we're going to have these big four corners. Now, the four corners are a lot of fun to make, but they do have 5 bias seams, which means they will have a tendency to want to stretch. So I have some tips and techniques on how to get those corners from not stretching and staying exactly the way we want them to stay. This big bold fabric is from Benartex, and it's called Flower Festival 2. You have a beautiful stripe, reds, greens, blacks, and golds. So I've chosen the big bold print, green, red, gold, some black, and I definitely am using my striped fabric. There's a big center square, so I have fussy cut one of those yellow poppies, and this size is a 8.5 inch square. From there, I'm going to just need some simple squares. I have a 2.5 inch, 3.5 inch, and 5.5 inch. For these 2.5 inch squares, the red, we need 8. The green, we need 12, and the gold, we will need 16. My 3.5 inch, the red one, I'm going to need 4 of them. The green, I will need 4, and this gold, I'm going to need 8. For the larger 5.5 inch pieces, the red, I need 4, the green, I need 4, and the gold, I need 8. So I have the same amount, just different sizes. The first border, I'm going to frame it with a black. These are both cut at 1.5 inches. I need 24.5 inches and 26.5 inches. So let's start with that. I am going to need some squares out of this stripe, but I'll get to that when I need it. These I will need to do nothing with. These I'm going to need to make half square triangles. So I have 4 of the red, 4 of the green, 8 of the yellow. I'm going to put those together to get half square triangles. So I'm going to place those fabrics together, draw that line down the center, and stitch a 1/4 inch on each side. Once we've cut those apart and have pressed them, we're going to be able to trim them down to 2.5 inches. So they will match our 2.5 inch squares. And we're going to put those aside, and we're going to match up the same. We have 8 of the gold, 4 and 4, make half square triangles, and we're going to trim those down to 4.5 inches. Let's work on those large half square triangles first. We're going to sew them together so we get this arrow shape. So we're going to be able to take those half square triangles, divide them in half, and sew them together. So you're going to have this stripe. The one side we're going to want to come up. The next side we're going to want that stripe to go down so that they make this arrow. I find it's the best just to lay them out like this, and then I can sew these together into 2s and then put that block together. And this will equal 8.5 inches, which will match our center block. So with those arrows done, we're going to work on the corners. We're making 4 corners, so let's take 4 of the gold, 4 of the red, and then take 4 of each of those half square triangles, and they're going to go together. So we have this little tulip shape. Take the green half square triangles, and we're going to put them beside the red half square triangles. And we're going to make a yellow triangle by matching those together. The green are going to go up and beside, and we're going to put a yellow on the edge. So we have 4 in one row, 3, 2, and 1. So the corner is going to look like this, but we're going to leave these squares on. So this is where we're going to have the bias seams. So the first thing that I recommend, and I always do if I am doing anything with a bias seam, is press well and starch. As a matter of fact, I double starch. So I'm going to spray my fabric, let that starch soak in, and press it. Do it one more time. You can even turn the fabric around to the other side, spray it, let that starch soak in, and iron. Then cut out your pieces. We want those pieces nice and stable. What that starch does is it acts like a glue, and it's going to sort of glue those fibers together. These 4 bottom squares are going to be cut off, and this is where the bias is, so I do need it good and strong. So I do like that extra starching. So there are a few ways we can put this block together. We can put it together in rows, or if you'd like, you can work on one corner and work down. I prefer to do it in rows. That way I know I have 4, 3, 2, and 1. I now have 4 of these beautiful little corners with these little pieces coming out. When you do sew these, we must remember to have that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we have a 1/4 inch coming off from both of these edges. Our stitching line needs to go right at the edge, so it's important that we have that 1/4 inch. Another thing is, as we are pressing, to try to press very gently so we don't stretch this out of shape. I do want that straight edge. So pressing very lightly with no steam is another key to not have this stretch out of place. Now we're going to cut some squares. We're going to want to sew a rectangle onto the end of this, but we're going to start with a square. I like to start with a really big square, and in this case I'm going to start with a 10-inch square. It's quite big, but you'll see why I want it so big as we go along. From here we're going to be able to fussy cut how we want our squares. If I cut it with the stripes going down in this direction, if I lay it down, this is the direction the stripes are going to be in. I would like my stripes so it's coming out. So you'll be able to fussy cut an area where you think you are going to want a little piece. So I want that red coming out of the center. So I have a 10-inch square, and this is where I'm going to cut it. So I'll have the stripe on one side and the stripe for the second square. So this is now a bias seam, but this is going to be a straight of grain. And this is where it's going to be cut, and that's very important that it is nice and strong. So I've double pressed this with the starch. Now I'm going to be able to trim up 2 of these squares. So there is my square. I'm going to take one corner and I'm going to lay it right in the corner. And if the seam is off, you're really going to be able to notice it. So I'm going to pin so that this edge is going to match this edge. It won't matter the direction of your seam allowance. I just want to match up that edge. I know this is already straight. I just want to keep this corner straight. So this edge matches. Before I do any cutting, I'm going to match the second side. And I'm going to pin that edge. Now before I go any further, I'm going to steam this with the iron. I'm not pushing the iron down, I'm just going to put some steam on it. And then I'm going to pat it with my hands so it's nice and flat. That steaming and that patting is going to make this nice and flat, and it's going to become straight. We need to draw a line from that one corner, crossing over that 1/4 inch to the next corner. So I have those 2 lines drawn, and I have that 1/4 inch sticking out. These lines are going to be lines that I'm stitching over. Once I've stitched on those lines, and have crossed over those points. When I open it up, I will have an 8.5-inch square on one side and one on the other. I can now trim off to 1/4 of an inch and press it open. So I get one side done and that second side. These 4 corners, even put together on their own, really does make an interesting square. But we do have other components to add. We have these little arrows, and they're going to go in between each block, and they're pointing out. Now we get to add that center block. So let's sew these blocks together. Sew them in rows and then sew those rows together. We now have a nice big 24.5-inch square. And by fussy cutting that stripe on the diagonal, it really gives this block a lot of definition. Now, of course, you could just do this block in any fabric, but the stripe really adds to it. And having these V's in these 2 different colors just gives it a little bit more dimension. I've cut those borders at 1.5 inches, so I'm going to be able to put the 2 sides on and then the top and bottom. And then we're going to do a large border. That little black border really does set it. It highlights the little bit of the black in it. And from here, we can add whatever borders we want. We could add a stripe border, but I'm going to add the poppy fabric. Now originally I was just going to put a border on and have some cornerstones, but I'm going to make a nice big border and miter those corners. I did put a 5-inch cut border on it, and that mitered corner really does finish it off well. This is a fun block to make, and it looks really great if you make it in more than one block. If you do 4 or 6, the quilt is going to be a lot bigger, but these tulip corners give us a secondary pattern, and that's fun just on its own. The whole key to keeping these corners from stretching out of shape is that we need to press it and starch it well even before we do our first cutting. After that, be gentle when you are sewing it and pressing it, and then put that big square on, do your seam, and then trim off that seam allowance. It's those little steps that can make the difference of this stretching or not. I love the way these big bold patterns look. They're a lot of fun to work with. Thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I do have a newsletter. It's all free under Sew Very Easy. Thanks again. Bye for now.